The world tilted 7 years I oiled that workbench. Same tin, same rag, same slow strokes along the grain, and not once did I know I was helping my mother bury something underneath it. The way you find most things that change your life by accident, mid-task, not looking for anything at all. The sandpaper caught on a groove that wasn't supposed to be there. Thin. The world tilted sideways, cut into the totara with a chisel point, then half sanded away by someone who'd wanted it gone a long time before I was old enough to ask why. The desk lamp closer and my thumb out of habit, the same habit that used to make my stepfather roll his eyes, ran along the letters. Some were in English. Most weren't. The world tilted sideways to make out a K. An S, a shape that might have been an ampersand, or might have been nothing, worn down to a suggestion of itself under 3 coats of Danish oil that smelled, even now. The world tilted to the way my grandfather's hands used to smell when he'd pull me onto his lap after a day's work. I want you to picture the shed first. The world tilted sideways, because you need to understand what this place actually was before I tell you what happened to it. The world tilted sideways. It sits on the Coromandel side of the harbor, close enough to the water that at high tide you can hear it slap against the pylons under the floor. Corrugated iron roof patched twice, the word painted the green my grandfather always called the only sensible color for a shed. Inside, the air is thick with sawdust and terps and the particular sweetness of kauri when you cut into it fresh. The world's was a radio on the shelf that only gets one station, and half the time even that comes through with static. The never once thought about fixing it because the static is part of the sound of the place now. My grandfather, Nils Lundqvist, came out from Sweden in the 60s with nothing but a toolbox and an accent nobody in this town could place for the first few years. He built the shed with his own hands. He built half the boats that still sit in driveways up and down this coast. And when I was 7 years old, after my dad drowned off the back of a fishing charter 3 bays over, the world grandfather's shed, I ended up in most afternoons, because nobody quite knew what to do with a boy who'd stopped talking for about 4 months. I never stopped coming back, even after he passed. The world till university I didn't finish, even through the 2 years I spent chasing carpentry contracts up in Auckland that paid better and meant nothing. I came back. The world tilted sideways is the only place I've ever been fully myself. Ask anyone in this town and they'll tell you Kalen Cross, boatbuilder, quiet fella, good with his hands, keeps to himself. That's me. That's been me for 34 years. The world tilted sideways. What I didn't fully understand until that Tuesday afternoon with the sandpaper still in my hand is that everyone in my family has spent just as long trying not to look at me too closely. The world tilted sideways. The phone rang. It even worked out what to do about the groove in the wood. I nearly didn't answer it. I'm glad I did, because if I hadn't, I wouldn't have found out the way I did, mid-sentence. The world tilted stranger. Sorry, is this the Cross property? I'm calling about the valuation Lachlan booked for Thursday. I asked her to repeat herself. She did slower, the way people do when they think you're hard of hearing instead of just stunned. A registered valuer out of Thames. Booked by my brother. For my shed. The world tilted sideways. I didn't shout at her. I want to be clear about that because I know how this sounds when I tell it. I know you're expecting me to have lost it right there on the phone, and I understand why. The world tilted sideways because God knows I wanted to. But she was just doing her job, and it wasn't her fault that nobody in my family had thought to mention any of this to me. So I thanked her very calmly. The world tilted sideways and told her Thursday wouldn't work. And then I hung up and sat on the edge of that workbench for what felt like a long time, staring at a groove in old wood that I still hadn't worked out how to read. Then I rang my mother. Cora Lundqvist doesn't rush to the phone. Never has. She lets it ring 3-4 times like she's bracing herself for whoever's on the other end. The world tilted think that was just her way until I got older and noticed she only did it with me. With Lachlan she picks up on the first ring every time. The world tilts a string tied between them that never goes slack. The world tilted sideways, just my name. Not hello, not what's wrong, just my name flat, the way you'd say a word you'd been asked to spell. I told her about the valuer. I told her I'd found something under the sanding. The world tilted sideways, something with writing on it, something in what I was fairly sure was Swedish, and did she know anything about it? The silence went on 3 seconds. I counted them. The world tilted till as I've learned to count the silences with my mother. They tell you more than anything she actually says. Don't touch that bench, Kalen. Her voice had gone somewhere I didn't recognize. The not angfrighten, maybe, in a shape I'd never heard from her before. Just leave it. Please. Mum. The world tilted as there's a valuer coming to my shed on Thursday, and you're telling me to leave a piece of wood alone. The world tilted sideways, not just wood. She said it so quietly I almost missed it, and then, before I could ask what that meant, she told me she had to go. Someone was at the door, and the line went dead in that particular way it does when someone hangs up on purpose rather than losing signal. I sat there a long time after that. The world till enough for the tide to come all the way in under the floor, Long enough for the one good radio station to lose its signal to static and stay that way. Because I didn't get up to fix the aerial like I always do. 27 years in this shed. The world tilted sideways. 27 years thinking the strangest thing about my family was that my mother never quite looked at me the same way she looked at my brother. I'd made my peace with that a long time ago. The way you make peace with weather. You don't ask why it rains, you just learn to carry a coat. That a groove in a workbench half sanded away, in a language only two people in this family ever spoke. And a mother who went quiet in a voice I'd never heard her use. The world piece of furniture she'd apparently known about for longer than I'd been alive. I ran my thumb along the letters one more time before I switched off the lamp. KS, and under the last coat of old. The worn down almost to nothing, something that might have been a word for a boy. Or might have been a word for a man who never came home from the water. Either way, someone had wanted it gone. The world tilted sideways. Me apparently, without ever being told, had spent 27 years oiling right over the top of it, keeping it alive without knowing it was there at all. The Lackland turned up 2 days later, and he didn't knock. The world, the ute before I saw it, that low diesel growl he'd had since he traded up to the hillocks, and then the door of the shed banged open and there he was, filling up the frame in his good jacket. The one he wears for open homes and client dinners, completely wrong for a boatch that smells of turps and low tide. He had a folder under his arm. I remember thinking before he'd said a word, that a folder was never a good sign with my brother. Lackland doesn't bring paper unless the paper's already decided something. Thought I'd come down before Thursday, he said. The world tilted side was a thing we'd already agreed on between us, rather than a thing a stranger had told me about over the phone. Save you the surprise. Bit late for that. The world to the decency to wince at that, just for a second, and then it was gone, smoothed over the way everything gets smoothed over with Lackland, like a wave going flat again after it's broken. The world tilted sideways. He set the folder down on the workbench, right on top of the groove I noticed, right on top of the letters I hadn't told him about, and opened it up. It's just a draft, he said. The world tilted signed. I wanted you to see the numbers before Mum did, because I know how you get about numbers. How I get about numbers. As if the problem here was that I couldn't do arithmetic. The worvel, the top of the page, was more money than I've seen written down in one place in my whole life. I'll give him that. Whatever else my brother is, he's good at what he does. The warrant under this shed, with the harbor frontage and the resource consent already sorted from Pop's day, was worth a genuinely stupid amount of money to the right buyer. I could see reading it. The world tilted to the argument he was about to make, and I could see that in his head it wasn't an argument at all. It was just true. Obviously true. The kind of true you don't need to raise your voice to say. You could buy a house in Wishanga outright with this, he said. A proper one. Not renting the flat above the dairy for the rest of your life. I'm not renting because I can't afford better Lackland. I'm renting because I don't need more than what I've got. The world tilted sideways. He stopped himself, dragged a hand through his hair, and I watched him try to find a version of the sentence that wouldn't sound like what it actually was. This place is a liability. The world tilted sideways for what it's being used for, half the roof's original iron, the insurance premium's probably a joke. It's not a business. It's a hobby that happens to have a harbor view. The world tilted sideways 2 boats. I've built 22 boats in the shed since Pop died, sold every one of them, put every dollar back into keeping the roof up and the tools sharp. Then my brother stood there in his good jacket calling it a hobby. The world tilted sideways. The part that still makes something twist low in my stomach when I think about it now is that he wasn't saying it to be cruel. He genuinely believed it. The world tilted sideways. That's the thing about Lackland you have to understand. If any of this is going to make sense to you, he has never once, in 38 years, needed to be cruel to get what he wants. The world tilted sideways because he has always been so completely certain that what he wants is also what's right for everyone else. Mum's already looked at it, he said. The word landed differently than anything else he'd said, landed somewhere under my ribs. She thinks it's a good idea too. Mum told me 2 days ago not to touch the workbench. The world crossed his face then, quick gone before I could properly read it. What workbench? I didn't answer him. The word know why. Some instinct told me to keep the groove in the wood to myself a little longer, like it was the one thing in this whole mess that was still only mine. Lackland waited a second. The word I didn't say anything else. He closed the folder, slower than he'd opened it, and for a moment he looked almost young. The world tilted sideways. Almost like the 11-year-old who used to follow me down to the water when we were kids before Auckland and the property course and the good jackets got hold of him. The world tilted to take anything off you, he said, quiet. I actually think I'm helping you. I know that's not how it feels from where you're standing. The world tilted sideways. But someone in this family has to think about what happens when Mum's not around to referee anymore. And it's not going to be me who does the sums because you never let anyone do the sums with you. The world tilted sideways. He left the folder on the bench when he went. Right over the groove. I didn't move it for an hour. I drove out to see my Aunt Hazel that Friday. The world tilted sideways mostly because I didn't know who else in this family might actually answer a straight question with a straight answer. She lives up past Coromandel. The Wordle place with a vegetable garden gone slightly feral and a veranda that catches the afternoon sun. The world tilted sideways, and she made me I didn't finish because my hands were doing something restless the whole time I was there. You found the writing, she said before I'd got more than 2 sentences out. You knew about it. The world tilted sideways. She looked at me a long moment, the way you look at someone when you're deciding how much of a thing you're allowed to hand over that isn't entirely yours to give. The world tilted sideways. Hazel's always been like that. She carries other people's secrets like they're heavier than her own, and you can see the weight of it in the careful way she chooses her words. The world's like she's checking each one for sharp edges before she lets it out. Your grandfather wrote that not long before he died, she said finally. I was here the day he did it. The world tilted sideways. Wrote what though? I've got about 6 letters and half a word. That's between your mother and that bench, love. It's not mine to hand you. The world tilted sideways. Azelle. I heard my own voice go somewhere I didn't like, somewhere close to pleading, and I didn't try to pull it back. There's a valuer coming to look at that shed. My shed. The world tilted sideways. Lachlan's all rough and got the numbers drawn up, and apparently Mum's already looked at them. And I still don't know why she went white as a sheet over a bit of old carving. The world tilted sideways. I'm not asking you to betray anyone. I'm asking you to tell me why I'm about to lose the one place that's ever made sense to me. The nobody in this family will look me in the eye about why. She was quiet a long time after that. Long enough that I heard the kettle tick as it cooled on the bench. The word Alfetta fantail came and went from the veranda rail outside. You look like him, she said eventually, more every year. The way you stand when you're thinking. The way you go quiet instead of loud when something's wrong. Your father did both those things. The world tilted sideways watches you do them, and I don't think she's ever once told you why it undoes her. I felt something go still in my chest. You knew my dad? Everyone round here knew your dad, Kalen. Good man. Terrible with money, wonderful with people. Drowned 3 bays over doing a job he shouldn't have taken on and weather he shouldn't have gone out in. The world till there was 29. You were 7. She reached over and put her hand on top of mine, and it was the gentlest thing anyone had done to me in about a week, and it still felt like a blow. The world tilted sideways. She didn't stop loving you when he died. She just couldn't work out how to look at you without seeing him standing there instead. And your brother. Bless him. The world once reminded her of anything she was trying not to remember. That's the whole of it, love. That's the ugly, simple whole of it. I drove home along the coast road with the window down, and I didn't cry, but I wanted to, and that felt like its own kind of strange grief. Grieving a version of my childhood I'd never actually had. The world tilted sideways. The version where my mother looked at me like she looked at Lachlan, and finding out instead that the reason she never did wasn't because I'd done anything wrong. It was because I'd done something right. I'd grown up to look exactly like the man she lost. The went back through everything after that. The way you do when a single piece of information rewrites a whole photo album in your head. The birthday she always remembered a day late. The world tilted sideways. She sent Lachlan to film because she was feeling crook, when I know now she wasn't sick at all. The world tilted size. I was 19 and she hugged Lachlan for a full 10 seconds and shook my hand. Actually shook it like I was a client. Because I'd grown a beard that summer and I must have looked the one unbearable second across the room like somebody she'd buried. None of it made me hate her. I want to be honest about that because it would be easier to tell you I did. The world tilted sideways was something worse than hate. It made me feel like I'd spent my whole life being punished for a resemblance I never asked for and could never have changed. The world's that the person doing the punishing hadn't even known she was doing it. The world to dinner happened on the Sunday. Mum's house, the one she shares with my stepfather out past Wishanga, roast lamb, the good tablecloth that only comes out when Lachlan's bringing news. The world tilted. Something was wrong the second I saw the folder on the sideboard. The same one from the shed, thicker now, with a pen sitting on top of it like a small, deliberate accusation. The world tilted sideways. Just need your mum's signature, Lachlan said halfway through the mint sauce, saying it to me like he was doing me a courtesy by including me in the sentence at all. The world tilted sideways to move quickly. It's a good number, Kayland. It's my shed. It's Mum's land, he said, gently, like he was correcting a child. It's always been Mum's land. Pop left you the tools and the business, not the title. The Wirt looked at my mother. She had her eyes on her plate, on the lamb going cold, on anything that wasn't me. The whir watched her hand move toward that pen on the sideboard like it belonged to someone else's arm. Mum, just that. Just her name, the way she says mine when she's bracing for something. She looked up then, the world tilted sideways, and there was so much in her face. Fear and love and something that looked almost like an apology that had been rehearsed for years and never once spoken, that I couldn't sit there and watch her sign it without saying what I'd been carrying around all week. The world tilted to the ute, brought the block back in with me, the offcut with the groove still half sanded, still bearing whatever was left of Pop's handwriting. The world tilted sideways, and I set it down on the good tablecloth between the roast and the folder and the pen. The room went the kind of quiet you could hear the tide in, if the tide had been anywhere near that dining room. The world tilted sideways. What is this? Lackland said, but he wasn't really asking me. He was watching Mum's face. Cora Lundqvist looked at that piece of wood like it was something that had crawled up out of the harbor itself. The world tilted sideways and hand stopped an inch from the pen. And when she finally spoke, it wasn't to Lackland, and it wasn't really to me either. It was to the wood or to whoever had carved it. The world tilted of her husband that had apparently never quite stopped living in her son's face. You don't know, she said very quietly, how much you look like your father. You never have known. The world tilted sideways, and I don't know if I've got it in me to tell you why that's the whole of this. She stood up from the table without another word, without touching the pen. They walked out through the ranch slider into the dark of the back lawn. The world tilted sideways, leaving the lamb going cold in the folder unsigned and her two sons staring at each other over a groove in a piece of wood that neither of us yet could fully read. The world tilted sideways. I followed out. Lackland didn't. I remember that clearly because it was the first time in a long while I saw my brother choose to stay behind. The world tilted sideways, like some part of him understood this wasn't his to walk into. She was standing at the edge of the lawn where the grass gives way to the bank down to the water. The wrapped around herself against the wind coming off the harbor. And for a long moment I just stood next to her and let the silence do what it wanted to do. Out past the point, the world tilted sideways. A single fishing boat had its lights on, moving slow along the dark line of the horizon, and I watched my mother watch it, and I understood, before she said a single word, exactly what she was seeing instead of a boat. Your father used to stand like that, she said finally, hands in his pockets, weight on one hip. The world tilted sideways. He used to say the ocean at night looked like it was thinking something over. She let out a breath that wasn't quite a laugh. You do the exact same thing. You've done it since you were small. The world tilted sideways. Used to have to leave the room. Mum, tell me what the carving says. She was quiet long enough that I thought she might refuse again the way she had on the phone. The world tilted sideways, the way she'd been refusing in one form or another for 27 years. But something in her had come loose at that dinner table, and I think once a thing like that comes loose, it doesn't go back. Your grandfather wrote it about 3 weeks before he died, she said. He knew it was coming. His heart had been bad a long while, and Pop wasn't the sort of man who pretended otherwise. The world tilted sideways. He asked me to sit with him one evening while he worked on that bench, and he carved it while we talked, the way he always did things with his hands instead of just his mouth. She pressed her lips together. It says in Swedish, for the boy who is his father made again. Keep this. Do not let it go to strangers. I didn't say anything. I don't think I could have. He meant it as the kindest thing he could leave you, she said. The world watched you follow your dad around this coast for 7 years before we lost him, and he thought, rightly as it turns out, that you were going to grow up to be him all over again. Same hands. The world tilted sideways. He wanted you to have something that said so, plainly in writing, so you'd always know it was a gift and not a curse. So why did you try to sand it off? The world tilted sideways to look at me then, and there were tears on her face that she didn't bother wiping away, which from my mother is its own kind of confession. Because I couldn't survive it, Kaylin. The world tilted wasn't true, because it was. Every year you got a little taller, a little quieter in the same places your father went quiet, and every year it undid me a little more. The word walk into that shed to bring you lunch, and for half a second, before my eyes caught up with my heart, I'd think he was standing there. And then I'd have to leave, and I'd hate myself for leaving. The world tilted sideways. I could think to do about any of it was take a cloth and a rag of sandpaper to the one place his handwriting still existed in the world. Because I thought if I couldn't see it, I might stop feeling it every single time I looked at you. You didn't finish. The world tilted sideways, a small broken sound, almost a laugh. I got about halfway through the second line and I put the sandpaper down and I cried for an hour and I never touched it again. The world just kept oiling over the top instead. Coat after coat, year after year, telling myself I was maintaining the wood. She shook her head slowly. I wasn't maintaining anything. The world was burying your father a second time every single year on the one surface where his memory was still handwritten. Though I let it cost you something you never even knew you were owed. And Lackland, the sale, was that about the shed, Or was it about not wanting to look at it anymore? The world tilted with think, if I'm honest with you for once. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, a practical gesture, almost embarrassed. The world tilted sides never once reminded me of anything I was frightened of. He was easy to love in a way that never cost me anything. It's an ugly thing to say about your own son. The world tilted sideways, but I don't think I loved him more than you, Kaylin. I think I loved him more comfortably. There's a difference, and you deserved better than the difference. And I don't know how to give you back the years it cost you. The world tilted Sal her it was fine. It wasn't, and I've learned enough in 34 years not to hand someone an easy forgiveness just to end an uncomfortable silence. The world tilted something instead that surprised both of us. I put my arm around her, the way I hadn't since I was probably 12 years old. The world tilted sideways, and we stood there at the edge of that lawn with the one boat still moving slow along the dark water, and neither of us said anything else for a long while. The world tilted sideways, just the wind in the harbor and that one boat still out there, its lights moving the way my father's boat must have moved the night before it didn't come back. Lachlan came out eventually. The world tilted sideways, hands jammed in his jacket pockets, and stood a little apart from us, the way you do when you know you've walked into the middle of something that isn't finished yet and isn't entirely yours. I didn't know, he said, just that, at first. Then, quieter, about Dad. About any of it. I always thought, I don't know what I thought, that Mum just found it easier with me. The Werver once asked why. Would it have changed anything if you had? He thought about that honestly, which I'll give him credit for. My brother has never been a stupid man, whatever else he is. The world tilted sideways. I don't know. Probably not soon enough. I've spent 15 years thinking I was the one holding this family together, and it turns out I was just the one it was easiest to love. The world tilted same thing, is it? He looked out at the water. I'll tell the agent it's off the market. Properly off, not just delayed. That shed's yours. It always should have felt like it was. The word I'm sorry it took a dinner falling apart for me to say so out loud. The word need the apology to be perfect. I've noticed, since that night, that the apologies that matter are rarely the tidy ones. They're the ones that cost the person something to say. The world tilted's cost him an entire version of himself he'd built his whole adult life around. That was enough. It didn't erase 15 years, but it wasn't meant to. The world tilted sideways. It was just the first honest thing he'd said to me in longer than either of us wanted to count. I went back to the shed the next morning before it was properly light, the way I do most mornings. The world tilted sideways, stood at the workbench a long time before I touched anything. The groove was still there, half a sentence in my grandfather's hand. The world till short by my mother's grief and left unfinished for 27 years. I thought about sanding the rest of it clean, finishing what she'd started. The world tilted sideways, smoothing back into ordinary wood the way it must have looked before Pop ever picked up his chisel. I didn't do that. The world tilted sideways said I got the fine, grade paper down from the shelf and worked it, slow and careful, along the edges of the letters that were left, the clearing away just enough of the old finish that the words came up clean and legible for the first time since before I could remember. KS and beneath them, worn but readable now, the rest of it. The world tilted sideways, the sentence my grandfather had meant for me and my mother had spent nearly 3 decades trying to make disappear. Then I did the thing I've done every working morning of my adult life. The Werver once felt like a decision until that morning it suddenly did. I opened the tin of Danish oil, worked a clean rag into it, and wiped it slowly across the whole bench. The world letter and grain together, the way Pop taught me before I was old enough to be trusted with the good chisels. The world tells him to hide it this time. I want that understood because for 27 years that same oil had been my mother's way of putting a lid on something she couldn't face. The world tells using it now for the opposite reason. To bring the grain up dark and warm and glowing under the shed lights. The world's anyone walking past that bench for years to come would see the words sitting right there on the surface, plain as anything, instead of buried under coat after silent coat. The rang my mother that afternoon and asked her to come down to the shed properly, not to argue and not to sign anything, just to see it. She came on the Wednesday. The world tilted so at old raincoat I remembered from when I was a boy. And she stood at the bench a long time with her hand resting flat on the wood right over the letters. The world the way you'd rest your hand on someone's shoulder. He'd be glad you found it, she said eventually. He'd be glad you finally let me. The world tilted sideways. She didn't say anything to that, but she didn't take her hand off the wood either, and when she left that evening, she didn't ask me once about selling, about Lachlan, about numbers or valuers or anything that wasn't standing right there in front of her. Just the bench and the smell of the oil still fresh in the grain. The world tilted standing where her husband used to stand, and for once in 27 years, she didn't have to look away from it to get through the moment. The radio still only got the one station. The world still drops to static most evenings around dusk, right about the time the tide comes all the way in under the floor. I never did get around to fixing the aerial. The pop never fixed it either. He said the static sounded like the harbor breathing. The world tilted sideways. And I didn't understand what he meant until I'd spent enough years in that shed to stop hearing it as noise and start hearing it as the sound of a place that was still exactly where it had always been. The whirl that bench every few weeks, same as I always did, same tin, same rag, same slow strokes along the grain. But I notice my hand now the way it used to just move on its own before. The world tilted suckunut in it at all. Now I feel the letters under the cloth every single time. KS and the sentence between them, and I press the oil into the cuts instead of over them. The world tilted sideways, cause that's the part Mum never learned how to do. And it turns out it isn't hard once you decide you want the words to stay legible instead of gone. Mum comes down to the shed sometimes now, the world tilted sideways, and she doesn't bring a folder. She brings a thermos usually, and she sits on the stool by the window that used to be Pop's, and she watches me work the way I used to watch him. The world tilted sideways, and neither of us says much, because I think we've both worked out that the talking was never really the thing that was missing. The world tilted sideways and was just being allowed to stand in the same room without one of us having to leave it. The word last month about a boat. Not a sale, not a valuation. A client of his wanted something built for his son's 21st, and Lachlan asked if I'd take the job, and then the world tilted sideways whilst as an afterthought asked if he could come down and watch me work on it some weekend, because he'd never actually seen me do it, not once, not in 34 years. I said yes, he hasn't come yet. The world tilted sideways, but I'm not ruling my breath, but I'm not ruling it out either, and that in itself feels like more than I had a few months back. The world tilted sideways, still rough in places where Mum sanded it half away all those years ago, and I've thought about smoothing that part flush. The world tilted sideways, making the whole sentence look like it was always meant to read clean. I haven't done it. I like that you can see where it was interrupted, and where it starts up again, whole in the second half. The world tilted sideways for a piece of wood to tell the truth about a family. Some of it worn down by a grief nobody wanted, and some of it left standing exactly as it was carved. The world tilted somebody to finally run their thumb along it and ask why. I still stand the same way Dad did, apparently. Hands in my pockets, weight on one hip. The world tilted sideways, looking out at the water like it's thinking something over. I don't mind it anymore. I've stopped trying to stand any other way.